think of when I say the word veteran? Is it the little old man at the grocery store wearing a black cap that says World War II veteran on it? Perhaps in your mind's eye, you see a gentleman at the end of the bar, covered in tattoos and drowning himself in alcohol from his post-traumatic stress. Maybe you're imagining a man on a street corner holding up a cardboard sign that says, "Homeless vet, every little bit helps, God bless America." The one person I bet you did not envision was me. Of course you have preconceived notions on what it is to serve our country. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, less than 1% of the American people serve our country. Of those service members, less than 15% are women. So I guess that makes me about a 15th of a percent of the population. Now here's something strange. When I look through the lens of my life, I see nothing but service. Myself, my husband, my sister, her husband, my dad, my grandfather, and my uncle, and someday too, my son will serve. In a Pentagon report, they say that 80% of recent enlistees come from families of veterans. Yes, it's the same families that continue to serve over and over again. But don't worry, because me and the rest of my one percenters will continue to fight for our freedoms and our right to have TED Talks and gather together if we so choose. Do you remember where you were on September 11th of 2001? Do you remember the exact moment you realized that America was under attack? The confusion and terror when an airplane entered the bottom left-hand side of your screen and hit the second tower. Maybe you donated blood or bought a little American flag and put it on your car antenna. Some people joined the military. Maybe you just sat in quiet reflection and let the horrific events sink in as we as Americans saw a small glimpse of what war really looks like. Above all, on that day, we vowed to never forget. People put support our troops signs in their yards. But eventually, the signs came down, the flags got tattered and removed, and ever so slowly, we forgot. That's where I come in. I'm in the business of helping people remember. Not only am I a veteran with 2 deployments, a journalist for the Iowa National Guard, I also founded a nonprofit called the Iowa Veterans Perspective. I've interviewed hundreds of veterans, and every story is unique, but they all have one thing in common. At one point in their life, they signed a blank check, payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including their own life. Of the interviews I've done, there are a few that will always stand out in my mind. And today I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that they've taught me. But first, let's start at my beginning. I was a private at Fort Meade, Maryland, learning about broadcast journalism. We were allowed to go into town on the weekends, and I chose to go to Washington, D.C. and visit the monuments. On the top of my list was the Vietnam Wall. Just seeing the monument was very moving for me. The grounds of the area have a feeling of quiet sadness that you can feel in the air. Kind of like right before a big storm, where the barometric pressure changes so fast that you can feel it. As I finished my walk along the wall, I came across a gentleman selling Vietnam War memorabilia out of a VW van. I decided on that day to buy this POW bracelet. It's just a little metal band with a name across it. They were really popular during the Vietnam War as our service members were becoming POWs. I picked one out specifically because it was a man from Carroll, Iowa, and it came with a piece of paper that told his story. I suppose that's the day I was introduced to the man whose story I would carry with me until this very day. Here's his story. In June of 1969, Donald Sparks was serving in Vietnam when his company was ambushed. In the confusion of the battle, Donald was lost, and due to heavy enemy fire, they couldn't get back to the area for nearly 12 hours. They had to call in airstrikes, which destroyed the entire area to save the company, but the body of Donald Sparks was never found. He was thought to be killed in action. Nearly a year later, a Viet Cong soldier's body was found, and on him were 2 handwritten letters in English from Donald to his family. These letters were written 10 months after he was thought to be killed. His military status was then upgraded to prisoner of war. Another 3 years later, 591 American POWs were released, but no Donald. The Vietnamese government denied any knowledge of him ever being in one of their POW camps, and to this day, no one knows what ever became of Donald L. Sparks, age 23 at the time of his disappearance, from Carroll, Iowa. It's been said that a person dies twice. The first is when their soul leaves their body, and the second is when their name is spoken out loud for the very last time. So as long as I keep telling his story and saying his name out loud, Donald Sparks lives in all of us, if just for a minute. I've had the privilege of interviewing retired Sergeant Major Sally Bale. She taught me that I'm not just a good female soldier, I'm a good soldier, regardless of my gender. She broke barriers in the Iowa National Guard not because she happens to be a woman, but because she's an amazing teacher, leader, mentor, and soldier. I remember meeting John Hintz, a veteran I interviewed that owns a tattoo studio in Waukee. He's been to Iraq, Afghanistan, and many places, other places all over the world. He told me that there's some good memories and some not so good memories, and that you could have an entire platoon in the same firefight, and everyone will have a different perspective of the same events. From him, I learned that every story is important because everyone's going to have a different perspective. I also got to interview Dr. Vincent Lewis. He told me that the military made it necessary to work as a team in order to be successful. Mission success in the military is a life or death situation. He said that him and his team were closer than brothers, regardless of their race or background. I also had the honor of interviewing Glenn McDowell, a POW during World War II. He taught me that a person's will to live is much stronger than you could ever imagine. You see, he lived under the torturous conditions of the Imperial Japanese soldiers on the Palawan Island in the Philippines for 3 years. He remembers the day the Americans flew overhead, signaling they were about to be freed from their captors. But once the Japanese realized what was happening, they corralled all 150 prisoners into the trenches, and instead of letting them be rescued, they started setting them on fire. On that day, only 11 escaped what is now called the Palawan Massacre. I also met Robert Savaride, a retired school teacher and World War II veteran. He told me that he was pulled out of college at the University of Northern Iowa and sent to France. The best part of his visit was when he then asked if he could play me a song on the piano. I watched as a 97-year-old blind man transformed before my very eyes as he flawlessly played me the most amazing melody, teaching me that music is a timeless and universal language. Roger Davidson told me his story of being drafted when he was just 19 and sent to Vietnam. It was his job to prepare the bodies of his fallen comrades to come home for their funerals. He explained how he would take such great care in bathing, shaving, and preserving them so their families could have a proper burial and say goodbye. In his first 2 weeks in country, he processed more than 400 bodies. He taught me that no matter what your job is, to do it well, because it will make a bigger impact than you could ever imagine. Then there's Kenneth Clegg, a World War II veteran that I interviewed. He passed away last summer, just days shy of his 102nd birthday. Because of the interview that I did with him, I was able to create a video that allowed him to speak at his own funeral. His family got to hear his voice and can still hear his voice and his stories anytime they want, because I took an hour of my time to ask him some questions. I'm going to leave you today with just one more story. Ron Langel was a combat medic in Vietnam. He said one of his favorite things to do was go into the villages and offer medical care to the local people. They vaccinated children, and he felt like he was really making a difference. I originally met Ron in 2014 in the Ankeny Library, where I was giving a presentation. Afterwards, Ron raised his hand and asked if he could share his story. He explains that he suffers from something called survivor's guilt. One of his buddies and him had shipped off to Vietnam at about the same time. Ron came home, but so many did not. He struggled for years to understand why he was spared, but his friend was not. He said that Donnie had been taken captive and became a prisoner of war, and the only thing that his family ever got back was a letter that had been written, and it was found 10 months after he was already thought to be killed. As I'm standing there, I'm thinking, this story sounds so familiar. Are you talking about my Donald? Are we talking about the same guy? And as I was still processing, I blurted out, is your friend Donald L. Sparks from Carroll, Iowa? And he looked at me shocked and said, how do you even know that name? And I said, in a way, he did make it out. He's been with me since 1999, and I've been carrying his memory with me this whole time as I held up my wrist and showed him the POW bracelet that I had gotten 15 years earlier. Donald's been with me through life's adventures, learning, love, and heartache. And everything else that life has to offer that he missed out on. I've shared his story countless times, but he's also part of my story. You see, once a person dies, the library of their life closes forever. A lifetime of stories gone forever. So it's our job to preserve those stories and help keep them alive. One of the top rules of journalism is, when you tell a story, have a point. So what's my point? Of all the different topics I could have chosen, why did I choose to introduce you to these people? Because they're people. We're people. Veterans are the people who would and have died for you. Complete strangers. We aren't identified by our physical or emotional scars. We have amazing stories to share, and we can teach the world so much about life. We just see the world through a different lens, so don't be afraid to look inside. So next time someone asks if you know a veteran, you can say yes. Her name is Sarah, and this is what she taught me. Thank you.